Video games based on movies typically aren't very well done. Much too often they are rushed projects that fail to capture the essence of the source material. For a very long time, the publisher Acclaim was responsible for a great many of these types of titles, snatching up everything from Stargate to Scooby-Doo and making a video game for it. Many of these releases were the type of software I could play one time and never touch it again. But in 1996, Acclaim had their newly acquired developer Probe Entertainment develop Alien Trilogy, a game loosely based on the first three films. It would take advantage of a much larger budget than any previous project done by Acclaim and was heavily advertised upon release. The question is, was this a cut above the normal dreck that these two companies were known for, or was it finally something worth my time? In this episode, we will be taking a look at Alien Trilogy to see if it lives up to its unforgettable cinematic history. The story of Alien Trilogy is mainly focused on the events and setup of the second film, Aliens. Ellen Ripley and a team of colonial marines are on their way to LV-426 to eradicate the xenomorph threat. The trilogy part comes in as elements from the other films are in place here as well. You'll get alien queens to kill, multiple alien types to blast, and even some humans and androids to dispatch. Gameplay is of the tried and true switch flipping variety, a staple of the first-person shooter at the time. Essentially, you are dropped into a stage, must carefully search the area and find switches to open up the final door to the next level. Sometimes you will need to find batteries to power up those switches, and each stage usually has an auto-mapping computer you can find that will give you the general layout of the area you're in. Since the weapons of the Aliens franchise has become quite iconic, those make their glorious appearance as well. You get pulse rifles, grenades, and flamethrowers to help you deal with the alien menace. Surprisingly, there are even destructible walls here that can be blown open to access new parts of the various stages. This adds a great sense of exploration that changes up the switch flipping a bit, with some stages adding elevators and multiple tiers to climb to find your way out. There are also different health and armor upgrades you can get that not just replenish your life, but protect you from the acid as well. It's very much a game of its era, however. The core of this isn't much different from something like Doom or even Wolfenstein 3D. Luckily, it does what it does quite well, which is shocking considering who made it. Alien Trilogy had an interesting journey during its development. It started out as a Sega CD game, moved to the 32X, and finally ended up on the Saturn, PlayStation, and PC. I'm glad it did because it's actually a very nice looking 5th generation engine. While dark, it runs smoothly, has a decent variety in texture assets across its 30 plus levels, and captures the feeling of the films quite well. The enemies are two-dimensional sprites but are still quite terrifying, backed up by motion capture technology that makes them move and act like their on-screen counterparts. The geometry draw distance is short and almost always in your face, something that is much more apparent in the larger areas. Overall, it's still a solid engine and one that did not make the hardware look bad in comparison to other versions at the time. In fact, if you put this beside the PlayStation edition, it holds up quite well. Not all is perfect, however. While it runs well and looks the part in general, some of the nastiness of Saturn ports shows up here and there. Transparencies are of course mesh textures here, making water, windows, and steam look just awful on any connection above composite video. There are also some performance drops in the larger areas with multiple enemies, though it is rare and doesn't typically affect gameplay. All of that is rather interesting considering this famously is reported to only use one single SH2 processor. I don't know how true that is, but if that's the case, this is further proof that Saturn Doom could have and should have been a much better looking game. Often for the sound of any given review, I just put up a few examples and move on. But here it absolutely must be stressed just how important the sound effects are to this one. While not specifically a horror game, there is a certain amount of fear exploring this title. The sound of the scurrying facehuggers, the shriek of the aliens once they discover you, the whisper of a cocooned colonist asking you to kill them. It all adds a richness to the experience that really heightens the sense of dread and excitement of the gameplay. The music is good too, making this one hell of an audio package. For all of the things that Alien Trilogy does right, there are some irritations that hold it back some. First, it's really easy to waste a ton of ammo in the firefights. Because of the way they are animated, enemies have a brief moment of invincibility after they are hit. That means weapons like the pulse rifle, smart gun, and flamethrower that continually drink your ammo will waste half of it hitting absolutely nothing. It took me a little while to notice this, and I highly advise you use short bursts to try and focus your damage in waves so you waste as little ammunition as possible. I also found that the size of the levels can be an issue. There are over 30 levels here, and while some are short and can be beaten in a few minutes, others are massive, sprawling caverns loaded with switches that must be powered up to use. This means you'll be wandering around wasting ammunition on blowing up crates because that's where things are hidden half the time. I'm also not a huge fan of the boss battles here. While the queens are impressively huge and terrifying, they take way too much damage to kill. I mean, you can unload everything you have and sometimes she just keeps coming. I highly advise you save your grenades for these fights, you're gonna need them. Outside of these quirks and complaints, Alien Trilogy is a damn solid 32-bit first-person shooter. It manages to look, sound, and play like something genuinely from that universe, and the Saturn conversion is as solid as third-party products come. While it could be argued that the PlayStation version has nicer lighting effects and transparencies, you are missing very little otherwise in the comparison. In fact, I find the better contrast on the Saturn actually helps the visuals more than any of the secondary special effects. Bottom line, Alien Trilogy on Saturn is definitely worth playing, and a rare excellent showing from Acclaim. First-person shooters during this time were really just finding their footing. They were quite a bit more simple than the massive multiplayer games we see today. For that, I cannot crack down on Alien Trilogy too harshly. While it lacks the open-ended freedom of Power Slave and the great weapons and multiplayer of Duke Nukem 3D, it has its own charm and personality. It runs well, it sounds incredible, and perhaps most important of all, you want to play it more after you turn it off. And really, I can't heap any greater praise onto a game than that. Probe Entertainment has crafted perhaps one of the better movie license titles of that generation. No small feat considering the usual quality they were associated with. Even game magazines at the time enjoyed it. If you play your Saturn regularly and want an action-oriented shooter that doesn't need much in the way of problem solving, this is definitely worth a go. The Saturn was represented well here and was a great example of a third-party product being just as capable as its often celebrated rival. It ain't perfect, but I had a ton of fun with it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.